Konstantaras again, from since the last conference. The paper we are representing is about convergence between trade and we say here politically correct, but we try to see, in following up the previous paper, it's a very good continuation, whether there are other, what would be a good way to measure convergence from a political and not only trade flow perspective. And, well, this is what it is about, really. Let me get into the story. Trade openness is the variable that expresses exports plus imports for every year divided by the GDP of the country. And mostly they use real values for it. So the issue is that trade openness is not only about trade. It reflects much more macroeconomic and political aspects than just mere trade flows. And the reason why we are inclined to do that is because there is a divergence of opinions on whether FTAs do promote trade and growth or not. And there are several, there is a school of thought that believes that really it promotes trade, and there's another school of thought that says that it doesn't manage to promote trade and development at the end. Now, it hinges very much on how success in an FTA is measured. So, the classical trade gravity model that's used in trade economics employs bilateral trades. So essentially you measure how has been the trade flows before the free trade agreement and how did these develop after the free trade agreement. And also it's used as a tool to guess before the free trade agreement is implemented whether it's going to be a successful or a not so successful free trade agreement. Now, the issue is that these trade flows do not give the full story about a successful or unsuccessful political agreement, because the political aspects of it is one side of the story, that politically a trade agreement might not work in the long run, let alone that from an economic theory standpoint, you can have not a positive, but it might have a U-shape. So it might be not a one-way to growth route, it might be growth, then reduction, and then growth again. So, looking at the openness variable, well, the openness, the more open an economy, the more sensitive it becomes to external shocks. And as a matter of fact, depending on the institutional structure of the country, more trade openness might advance inequality or might suppress inequality within the country. So, what we do in this paper, we take trade openness as a normal public good, as we say. So, what do we mean by that? To have the ability to trade, it's a benefit to the society. So if you compare a society that cannot trade with external partners, with countries, it's a very closed country, with a more open country, there's a difference in terms of the ability of people to exchange their goods at better prices and get exposed to different cultures. So, and allowing also for the effect that the more, higher trade is associated with wealthier countries, so you can not only figure out that openness can be treated as a public good, but it can also be treated as a normal public good, which means that it's positively related with higher GDP. Now, take for example what happened with the Mediterranean. So in the Mediterranean, you have a lot of regional free trade agreements. Some of them, well, one of the most, one that we can have a look at it is the European free trade agreement. This European free trade agreement tried to promote bilateral trade flows. For some reasons, it didn't work at the first stage to do this, to effect this. And it has been considered by those who have been doing the trade gravity models as a not so successful free trade agreement. For various reasons. Now we want to look at the openness and see whether openness can give us an insight on whether this could have been a successful or not a successful agreement by looking at the convergence between countries in terms of the openness. So once we figure out that openness can be treated as a normal public good, then we can take it in the Soloff sense. So essentially you can do the convergence of economies analysis. And this has been previously done, but in a theoretical context. So what we suggest here is that trade openness is much more than just trade flows. So when two countries trade with each other, you have an effective free trade agreement can generate much more than bilateral trade, but can open the economy overall on an aggregate level. Yeah. So here is what you can see in the Mediterranean what happens. So here it looks as if there is some sort of openness convergence. Or maybe not. Well, clearly, this is the average EU Met. This is the one line, the European Union, and this is the MENA countries, the Middle East and North African countries. So you see that up until a certain point of time, they seem to converge. So there was a divergence, and then they coming closer. But this is disrupted at the famous year of 1995 that you have the Barcelona Declaration. So up until the Barcelona Declaration has been announced, there was a convergence between North and South in the European openness. But after this free trade agreement was announced, it worked the opposite way. And as a matter of fact, we do some unit root analysis to see about the convergence and that one. And what is quickly, I can tell you that it's we implement we borrowed a model from it's called Granger causality. So essentially, you try to figure out whether the openness of one country is predicted better, the way it develops, if you introduce the openness of a different country, and you see what extra is there to bring to the table if you consider the free trade agreement parties to Granger cause the openness of other countries. And as a matter, the results are, I have to speed this up, that Spain is the biggest influencer in the free trade in the north-south Mediterranean area. And the second runners-up are France and Cyprus. So you see that this has a lot of things to bring to the table than just bilateral trade, because this means how can one can politically open the country, to what degree can they affect the politics in the area. Now, who are the dependents? Who are the ones that are more influenced than others? Turkey is the number one, and Algeria. Now, Algeria is an oil exporter, so there is a big reason for it to be dependent on other countries. So, well, I don't believe that there is a lot of time to discuss about the econometric modeling that we do. But for example, you can see here in terms of the convergence that really after 1995, this convergence has disrupted. So okay, maybe the degree of convergence is not, well, irrespective of the framework, the results are consistent. So consistently, even if you take the cyclicality into account or whatever, this free trade agreement didn't work towards converging between the openness of the countries. So we can see that essentially there are some free trade agreements that might be promoting to an extent bilateral flows, but they do not have the power to influence the aggregate openness of a country. So an overall closed country can remain closed. And as a matter of fact, there are some free trade agreements, in which case has been the EU North-South European Free Trade Agreement, that can work even detrimentally in the convergence between the openness of the economies. And that might give an insight on why this trade agreement has been revisited, has been scheduled many times. Now it's in the process of being redrafted, and they introduce other deeper, cohesive factors to amend the initial plan. But the initial plan for promoting the trade did not work in this context. So maybe the way to the future is to have more politically attuned free trade agreements, and this is the way now. This is the way that we have discussed that free trade agreements develop nowadays. Okay, so this is it. I'll be glad to entertain any questions later.